No mai haere mai, and welcome to Cult Chat, the podcast where we talk about coercion, control, and all things cultish. I'm Dr. Caroline Ansley. I'm a medical doctor. As a child, I lived at the Centrepoint community, a notorious cult in New Zealand, and now I run a website that advocates for the former children of the community.
I'm Liz Gregory, and I run the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust, and I'm privileged to walk alongside people after leaving this group as they embark on their new lives.
And I'm Lindy Jacob. I'm a former member of the Exclusive Brethren, and I'm part of the Olive Leaf Network, a new initiative in Aotearoa to support leavers of high-demand religious groups.
Come with us as we unpack the cult playbook. We'll be talking to experts and leavers of coercively controlling groups, and we will call for Kiwis to cult-proof their lives.
Come with us as we traverse the cultiverse.
A warning, this podcast contains references to subjects and discussions which may be difficult for some people to hear. Please take care of yourselves and your whānau when listening.
Hi, Kaz here with my friend Anka Richter, who's the author of the fantastic book, Cult Trip. She's bringing us an exciting event this year.
Thanks, Kaz. Australasia. Get ready for Decult 2024, the first cult awareness conference in New Zealand, happening in Christchurch this October. Are you worried about a friend or family member who's in a group that may be causing them harm, or do you have your own story? Then join us for a weekend with experts from around the world, where those who've left cultic groups can share their experiences and meet professionals who can help them. Head to our website, decult.net, for all the info.
Come cult-proof your life at Decult 2024. I'll be there.
Kia ora, ladies. It's great to be back in the studio with you both. So, what's been happening in your corners of the world?
Oh, hay fever? Does that count? Yeah. I've been here staying with Kaz's family. The family of cats, it's expanded, and I am so miserably allergic to the cats.
So you mean cat fever?
Cat fever, and so, you're a medical doctor. Is it okay to take 2 or maybe 3 hay fever tablets?
Yeah, I tell people to take 3, sometimes 4.
I might be with my 3rd in me now, just so that I can dry up and stop the run.
Oh, I see.
I've got very friendly cats, and they kept on jumping on Liz's lap, and the violence with which she threw them off was a bit distressing.
Like, what is it that cats sense in someone who don't come near me, and they're like, I'm coming to you.
Yeah, I felt bad for them. You hurled that cat off your lap, but then I remembered that you do suffer from this cat fever, so that kind of is fair enough. But I love them. I stayed as well at Kaz's and all night. This gorgeous little, is it a Burmese?
Yeah.
This gorgeous little Burmese hot water
Did
bottle.
she sleep with you last night?
Snuggled in with me. Yeah,
It gets onto your clothes, and then I sneeze when I get home when I bring out that jacket again because I sat on the couch at Kaz's house.
Tell you what, Liz, you'll just have to bring your cat traps with you next time you come and stay.
Oh. I'm a bit worried when she drives up my drive, she'll drive over my cats.
Well, why were we staying at Kaz's house? That might be the next question.
That is a good question. Hey, well, we are so excited today to be talking about a wonderful opportunity that the 3 of us had, along with 1,000 other, I believe, people from around New Zealand yesterday. We had a one-day conference with the legendary, genuinely amazing, world-renowned neuroscientist and psychiatrist, Dr. Bessel Van Der Kolk. So I've got his wee book here. I don't know if you've seen it around. It's called The Body Keeps the Score, Mind, Brain and Body in the Transformation of Trauma. And it has been on the New York Times bestseller list for
50 weeks or something.
No, it was 250 weeks.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Just
forever.
It's and I must say that when I read this book a couple of years ago, my mind was blown, and it's to me among the top 3 books I've ever read in my life. I think he's 81 now, and it means that he's been alive at a very interesting. It's interesting to hear from someone who's been in a field for decades and they've seen the evolution of the field. So, for example, he was studying trauma sort of in the early stages of brain imaging and body scanning being able to be available, and for them to be able to get just huge amounts of study and research unfolding, new frontiers unfolding of understanding what is going on in the brains and bodies of traumatised people. And so he's been able to be at the forefront of that field for several decades. And now, 2024, age 81, he is still travelling around and teaching about sharing his knowledge, and it's phenomenal.
And involved in research. And I don't know if it was disturbing or incredible that he said, even after all these years,
he struggles for funding.
No.
Oh,
People don't know anything about trauma.
oh,
Yeah.
right.
And he said, and even in his field, we're still saying there is so much more to know. There's no full stop at the end of this guy's decades of research. And that can sometimes leave you feeling a little hopeless and helpless. But I loved the way he passed the baton on.
Yeah,
And he said,
like, you guys need to stand up.
you guys are going to have to do this. You're going to do the research, get us the data, because we need to reduce the amount of trauma and we need to increase the amount of healing and recovery. And I love that. That's the things we want to talk about, isn't it? How do people coming out of cultic groups recover from the complex trauma? And he's the guy that came up with PTSD.
Yeah. Along with some colleagues, they went to the DSM-4 and said, we need a new category to describe chronic the trauma that he was seeing in Vietnam vets. He was investigating them. They were coming to him and saying, I'm a monster.
Yeah.
I'm a monster.
What's happened to me?
I'm waking up in the middle of the night with my partner with my hands around her neck, because she moved in the night,
Or
and
lashing
I was taken back to this moment. I have no control over my emotions, and I'm losing the people in my life. And
so he came up with developmental PTSD, which is also known as complex PTSD.
Can you explain PTSD?
Post-traumatic stress disorder, which is the title that was then put into the DSM-4, the New Zealand, the American Psychiatric Association's manual.
Diagnostic manual.
Yeah, which notably medicine and psychology, surgery and other areas of medicine don't have a manual that says what all the conditions are. Psychiatry does have this manual that he did sort of...
He completely poo-pooed it. He said it's outdated and irrelevant and needs to be thrown out. He was absolutely scathing of the DSM, which is very interesting, because people treat it like an absolute Bible.
Yes, exactly, which I'm saying as a doctor is bizarre.
Because in no other field...
When I, as a GP, I'm looking at someone with a psychiatric diagnosis, we have to tick some boxes to say if they've got the condition or not. Whereas if I'm seeing a surgical patient, I don't have to tick boxes. I go, this person I think has got appendicitis. I don't have to go through a manual to work out if they've got this and this
Or
and
be
this.
formally assessed.
Yeah. Well, they do eventually. They see a surgeon. And
Here's an interesting one. I had someone ask me the other week. They were sort of challenging my view that the leader of Gloriavale, hopeful Christian, may have had a personality disorder or narcissism was, on display. And they said to me, now, you've got to be careful there. He didn't get any formal diagnosis. And I said, you don't need a formal diagnosis to have narcissism. The pushback was, yes, you do, until it's been verified. And given that, you can't say they had it. And I said, that's not true. This person is displaying symptoms. The fact they then go off and get a diagnosis, that just confirms already existing behaviours. But there was definitely no.
yeah, well, I think that's the thing about the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, and how it's used. It's used in that way, and we're all accustomed to it when people have mental health diagnoses. But anyway, he was fundamental and instrumental in creating this category in the DSM-4, which at the time was pivotal for access to treatment, research grants. The role of it is significant. Yeah. But he then went to talk about how he now, looking back, no longer kind of really respects what they came up with and what is therefore continued.
And why. So I think a key part is that in the DSM, it's just PTSD. It's not developmental or complex PTSD. Whereas in that definition of PTSD is and still is around more like one very particular horrific one-off event, whereas
Like a car crash.
yes, whereas the concept of developmental or complex PTSD, as Judith Herman, another trauma expert, called it, it's acknowledging that for many people there are multiple layers of trauma, and especially when trauma has occurred at different developmental stages of a person's life, then what you're looking at is much more complicated and much more harder to heal and resolve than, say, an adult who's had a pretty good, stable, secure life and who then suffered a horrific car crash in this one-off event.
And that's
so
why
that's
we're
the
talking.
difference.
That's why we're talking about it on Cult Chat. What has
Yes.
this got to do with Cult Chat? Because people who come out of cults, the research shows that a vast majority could have complex PTSD
Yes.
because of the life they've lived. There are attachment issues, there are all sorts of things. So the trauma is widespread, it's along a long time period, and there may have been specific instances as well of traumatic abuse, say sexual abuse, which is often commonly...
And then that the leaving process itself creates its own trauma. So
he,
yeah.
I'd like to just go how he actually rubbished the actual diagnosis of PTSD. He said, look, the diagnosis says that trauma is unusual. That's not true. And he
said it's
mentioned
everywhere.
It's everywhere, and he pointed out the fact that 1 in 5 women have been sexually abused, and that, you know, basically assault by women is ignored, and yet it is actually very common. It also He's also said,
but we're not wanting to say that it's common and commonly accepted, because groups and cults like to use that, and they say, oh, it happens everywhere, it happens in the world, and they
that's right.
deflect, and
Yeah.
we don't need that.
Okay.
Yeah.
He also said it's not a memory diagnosis. That's people actually say it's all about your memory, but it's actually that he kept on saying that the past comes in the present, and the present,
critical.
The past is now.
Yeah.
It's happening
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah, so it's not just that you've got a problem in the past that can be talked about and resolved because it's back there. It's, that
Everything in your body is telling you this is happening right now.
Yeah, I'm not safe
You are
right now.
literally at risk
Yeah.
now.
Yes.
Your life is at risk now.
Quote, your brain lives in the present as if it is in the past.
and your body. Yeah,
And
the body is traumatized.
again, he says there's no recognition of the developmental level of the person, and he said the brain is shaped by experience. If you're traumatized early in life, it becomes part of your identity. And he said that PTSD diagnosis does not recognise the role of attachment.
Yes, and he really emphasised that. And for the listener, if you don't know much about attachment theory, it is crucial to understanding trauma, and it's also crucial to the impact of high demand or coercive groups. And Bessel Van Der Kolk emphasised that. He kept saying we are social creatures, and trauma happens in a social context, and healing has to happen in a social context. And he said he really emphasised that attachment and problems with attachment are at the core of trauma.
Can we come back to that and spend quite a bit of the last
we will,
part
we
of
will.
the session
Yeah,
on
yeah.
that attachment
On
concept?
attachment?
He said if we stuck up for each other, we would not have PTSD.
Wow,
Yeah.
interesting.
How do people feel secure again?
So can we jump back to just explaining a bit more about the trauma? We've talked about PTSD, we've just talked about trauma being a brain and a body. Then can we just have a bit more of a conversation about how it might manifest in someone?
Well, he talked about the fact that, and this is how I understand it, a traumatic event doesn't necessarily create a trauma experience inside the person. So I could be in a car crash, get out of the car, be immediately embraced by supportive people, and look back on it and have no trauma. However, if I'm stuck in a car, I can't get out. I'm immobilised. I'm afraid for my life. When I get out, I experience no support. So there's a lack of ability to physically remove yourself, while all of your body, every part of your body, the whole vagus nerve which goes through your body and tells your organs to do all the different things needed.
Flight.
It can't. Flight, fight. Yep. That's the whole flight-fight response of moving from rest into extreme arousal. Your heart rate going up, your blood pressure going up, your vision contracting, your gut slowing down because it shouldn't be digesting while blood flow is going to your muscles. If you're physically stuck and you cannot do what your body needs you to do to escape the danger, there's the problem.
Yes,
the
and
hyper-arousal in your body.
yeah, and he connected that to horror. He said trauma is horror. So he said it's not just having an unpleasant experience, it's a profound horror and a terror, and it's also deeply connected to helplessness. As Kaz had described, if there's a feeling that you're utterly helpless to stop this horror happening to you, then you're most likely to be traumatised.
There is the cult link, the entrapment that people feel by a group of systems of control or the ideology of the group.
Yes.
He also said that traumatic memories are unprocessed emotions and sensations. It's a bodily manifestation. So often your senses are aroused, and that can trigger a memory back to those unprocessed emotions. And so someone smells something and they might be in the butchery and they're having this panic attack and their heart starts to...
And they don't even understand that smell of the meat has reminded them of a trauma that they experienced in the past. It hasn't been processed yet.
So the sensations, sounds, bangs, all sorts of things. But he said overwhelming emotions, a reaction to stress with excessive and an irrelevant response. But it takes your body a lot of energy, and it becomes hard to live and learn when your body is in this hyper state.
Do you remember when he was talking about different types of emotions, when he interviewed people and said, think of something that was horrible and horrible in your life, and think of something that was pleasant. And he said, do you ever get reminded of the smell of your husband on your wedding day? And they were like, huh?
No.
Just the sound of the music on your wedding day. Oh, that might be a different one. Take you back to your wedding day, maybe.
Well, he was describing that you didn't have this somatic flashback with positive memories.
Yes.
You can have you think back to positive memories of your life, and you can cognitively think of them, but you don't usually have this very powerful physical sensation associated with it.
Yeah.
The way you do when you have a memory that is of horror, attached to horror and terror and helplessness. It sends your body physically straight back in there the way it doesn't for positive memories, which is a bit of a shame. It'd be cool if we could bring back positive memories somatically.
Well, you could see the brain waves. They've done a lot of brain studies, and you see what happens to the brain and memories. Do you remember the 4 strands sort of get split up and
The disintegration
in the mind? So he talks about people being out of sync. Trauma is when you're out of sync with your environment and you get out of sync with those around you. But the out of syncness is in the brain.
Yes, so he did talk about how this overwhelming somatic response to trauma that we can't do anything with because we're stuck at the time.
Yes.
And how in that stuckness, that the trauma, actually in the moment trauma, not the when you actually originally experienced the trauma, and how that leads to disintegration in your memory laying down, like how, and he also talked about that people who have experienced trauma, like say as a younger person, it's not just that event that leads to disintegration in the mind, that you can never kind of create a coherent story about what happened, say the car crash. He said it changes something in the neurobiology of the brain that means that later, less traumatic, just normal experiences are then disintegrated.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's there's that research that people coming out of high control cult groups, their brains freeze. And they talk about an unfreezing time period after you leave. And there's a lot of recommendations that people leaving those kind of groups shouldn't probably go into tertiary study because they actually struggle to do it because the mind. Did you find that yourself?
Oh yeah, well even I tried to work in a sales job within a month of leaving and thought I can pick myself up by my bootstraps and get out there and get employed, and I just found myself, I could not cope. My brain was so overwhelmed with not feeling safe, with struggling to process this brand new environment that I found myself in. I just did not have the mental capacity to put a smile on my dial and get out there and meet strangers and sell stuff. I could not do it. No. But I think, at that point, no one around me, because, you sort of look normal on the outside and people around you don't realise that actually you're dealing with someone who's going through a huge internal disruption and is, processing trauma. And is in a traumatised state. Yeah, I think one thing, it was so fascinating. The whole thing was so fascinating. And if you haven't read his book, it made me laugh actually. He said, you could all get all this information by reading my book. But he said, you've all come together because we're social creatures, which is so true. There was such a buzz in the room and people connecting with each other and that kind of thing. But anyway, going back to you talked about how one person might experience a traumatic thing, and it will affect them differently to somebody else. And he talked about how the environment around you, socially in particular, is absolutely critical here. And he gave some examples. I think it was around the Twin Towers, the Twin Towers situation. And he talked about how people who could respond in that moment of trauma and could run to a safe place, could get away and go to their house and their home environment was safe, how they recovered, including little children who witnessed it. If they had a safe home that they were taken to and received, then they coped way better than people who were from lower socioeconomic environments who didn't have a safe home to return to. Those sorts of people.
And the ones who suffered the most were those who had domestic violence in their lives.
Those who had domestic violence in their lives, which is just what Kaz said earlier, that if there's already been an imprint that the world is not safe or that you don't feel that you have a safe place already, then if you experience a further threat to your safety, it completely re-traumatises you. It takes you back into that place. I thought that was incredible. So he said, if your home is safe, you can survive just about anything. What a powerful line, and yet how gut-wrenching to think of how many people there are across New Zealand, how many men, women and children who their home is not safe, and so they cannot cope with these things. You need a safe place to receive you.
There's always a spike of domestic violence during difficult social events like the earthquakes in Christchurch, the pandemic. You know, it goes up through the roof.
And then as we flick on to cult thinking, we're called Cult Chat, think about the home lives of, let's say, Gloriavale, live in community where really the adults have had very little input in many ways into their children, into their development, into imprinting on them a feeling of safety and openness and honesty. And that is devastating that someone can have an experience in a group like that and not feel safe in their home, because he says who is there for you is probably more important than what happened for you.
That is what, say that again. That line, I wrote that down too. That is a powerful line. Listen to this, people.
Who is there for you is probably more important than what happened
in my notes, he didn't say probably. It was a fact. It was who is there for you is more important than what happened to you. And anecdotally from myself, I just completely agree that the key to being able to heal and work through your trauma is having people who are there for you. We're social creatures, he keeps saying. Attachment is at the core of trauma, and having people who are there for you. He talked
about trauma systems and the attachment system. And he says that if they're competing, the trauma system will drop down. So if you've got a healthy attachment system, then the trauma system can be broken.
And here's the example. The children in the Blitz, London. Great, well-meaning families didn't want their children traumatised by the concept of the bombs, and they were running into shelters, and so they chose to take their children and pass them off to perhaps relatives in the countryside.
Or strangers. They put on trains and sent away.
While the parents stayed behind in London, and it was, in the studies they've done, it was more traumatic for the children who were sent away because they felt detached from their family, they felt all those feelings of rejection and abandonment and homesickness, trying to integrate disrupted their life, than those children who stayed.
Well, that's when he said attachment systems trump the trauma system. You take your cue about the how bad this situation is from your attachments. And can I bring in an earthquake example? You know, because I lived through, as all other Cantabrians did, the earthquakes. And what I noted is that the patients, adults who were anxious people, were more likely to then end up with kids who responded to the earthquakes. I don't want to say that it sounds kind of blamey, but I think at the end of the day, whenever there was a shake, my sons would look at me and they would go, "What does that mean, Mum?"
How's Mum responding?
And I wasn't particularly anxious about the earthquakes. So the cues that I gave them were
reassuring.
This is okay. And in fact, they thought it was fun.
Wow.
But that is, like I've also, if you actually take a lot of meaning and fear, and you have a lot of fear yourself, then that's the cue and the message you send to your children.
Wow. Yeah,
I mean,
well,
I don't know how to say that in a way that doesn't sound blaming.
Well, no, he talked about how, our brains and our bodies are constantly taking cues from our social environment. And he said, my notes here say, how do you help people to feel safe in their bodies? Critical question, especially for anybody working, trying to help clients or friends or family to recover from trauma. How do you help make people feel safe in their bodies? He said, firstly, it is by establishing safe relationships. Wow. So it's not about, you just need to talk about it more, you need to process your past, you should journal, you should keep a gratitude journal. It's not that. Firstly, he said, it is by establishing safe relationships.
Haven't we talked about that before? If you've been damaged by an unhealthy community, where do you get your best healing? In a healthy community. Such an interesting concept. So it's about who is there for you.
So one of the best things you can do if you're a therapist or a friend or a family member supporting a traumatised person is actually not even necessarily about them and helping them talk it out or whatever. It's about making sure you're a safe person, you are a safe, trustworthy relationship for this
And they will talk.
person.
They will talk
And
to
then
those
they'll
people.
talk. Yeah.
Yeah, well, he did actually, he did a couple of fantastic little case studies where he showed us videos of himself with a client and he talked about like that. So that we've got two examples here. One is the general social environment that the person is in, and then there's the interpersonal psychotherapy relationship they're in. And he talked about how critical it is that you have to go in very gently when discussing trauma, and you need to make sure that the hyperarousal
It's not.
it's
the
being
person's
settled. You need
not-
to move them out of that. Like I start talking about the experience and my body just starts to turn on, and you could see that in the videos. These they were women, the ones he videoed. Yeah, they were both women, and their bodies were just hyper alert. You could just physically see.
You could see a hot flush coming across them.
The shoulders bunching up.
The stomach was.
Yeah. And he said like, you can't talk to a person about their trauma in that
because
state.
they're operating. They're operating from their animal brain. They're completely in the limbic
reptile.
system.
They're not in the logical one.
Yeah.
They've moved.
Remember that graph he showed where he said he talked about the frontal lobe and the limbic system, the emotional centre, and he said they do not talk to each other.
Yes.
He said there's no way for them to talk to each other. So if you're in that I'm shouting at my husband moment,
It doesn't help to use logic.
it doesn't help to use logic because
Can't you see you're being irrational?
calm down.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not in that zone. And actually, he said how to calm the bodies down. How do you calm the bodies down? He said each person needs to discover what that is. And so each person needs to be attuned to the limbic system firing up. And there was a tapping mechanism.
Yeah.
This woman tapping. He said, tap
Tap
up
on
here.
on his shoulder blade.
Sometimes-
her clavicle.
Sometimes after 30 seconds or a minute.
Well, because a key thing, like if we go back to the big picture, a key thing of Dr. Bessel Van Der Kolk's work is around the physical body. That's why his book's called The Body Keeps the Score. And that's a crucial part that he keeps saying is that it's not just all in the mind. It's not just talking about it. He said talking only doesn't work. You've got to find things that involve your physical body, physical movement, and physical action and movement is a key to being able to get a person stuck in a state of trauma to move forward and to process it. And so it can be as simple as tapping or altering your breathing or altering your posture. He talked a lot about posture and people who are down like this, or versus if you sit upright and open your shoulders and breathe.
Yeah, can you feel angry if your body is up and open and out?
Yeah,
Whereas can you feel happy if you're scrunched down and bent over and looking down? It's like actually physically and emotionally your body has to correlate.
Yeah.
Someone who's traumatised, he said, well, there's a look.
Yeah, they'll scrunch forward. Yeah.
He said trauma is lived out in the theatre of your body.
Yeah, great line. Yeah.
What a powerful concept. Trauma is lived out. So should we turn our attention to some of the techniques for recovery, because we can talk about trauma and we need to make the link as well to cultic groups, and that is they are trauma-inducing factories. Cults induce trauma. End of story.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would want to start a conversation about tools with the caveat that he he was very humble about what we don't know, and he said very clearly, because there's two questions. There's this thing of how do you heal trauma, but connected to that is how do you heal broken attachment. And he actually said we do not know a lot about how to heal broken attachment, which I thought, oh, that's not what I want to hear.
No, what I want to hear. Yeah, exactly. When you're stuck with that, that's your heritage.
If that's your heritage, you didn't have
a
safe attachment. He said we don't know a lot about how to heal that, but so that's our caveat, is that we don't have all the answers, but there were definitely some really great tools. So. Yeah, Liz, have you got something in mind there that you'd like to kick us off with?
Oh, I loved what he said, that imagination is central to recovery.
Oh, we have to help people to imagine a new reality.
Other possibilities. Overcoming trauma is being able to imagine other possibilities and experience new realities. So let's think about the cultist, someone who's left a cult.
Yes.
Their imagination has been shut down. How many cults do you hear of where kids weren't allowed to, have creative stories or couldn't play, and Winnie the Pooh wasn't allowed to be watched because he was an animal that spoke.
Well, no one ever asks you, what do you want to be when you grow up? What are your dreams? No one asks you that. I can remember somebody asking me that in my 20s, and I was just like, what are my dreams? Like,
how do you dream when you don't have language or experiences
and you don't
to
think
hang
you've
it on?
got a future because Jesus is returning?
Yeah, you're just focused on
up.
survival. A person who's focusing on survival can't use their imagination. They can't use their curiosity. They can't use their wonder.
And they're punished for those things, probably, in reality.
So he said, let's look at all the different types of imagination and recovery. So there was art therapy and sand therapy and theatre play and improv and singing in choirs and dancing together and things that involved the body.
Didn't he talk about that thing that was done with those young people who had some criminal history, or they were in the youth justice thing, where they went and did sort of some Shakespeare?
That's
and
right.
they imagined, these young people had obviously had really terrible backgrounds, were imagining themselves as the powerful king,
character,
the powerful king who was, and like how powerful is that? And how many children actually in trauma already use imagination already. I'm reading Janja Lalich's book, which is called Escaping Utopia, which is a bit similar to the name of the documentary that we've just had on New Zealand. Anyway, she takes lots of quotes from these children, adults who are now children, and one of them he keeps on talking about as a kid how he used to go into his fantasy world, and that was where he imagined a different life for himself.
Yeah, I did things like that.
So it is there, it can't be entirely suppressed.
Yeah. Yes, so that's really interesting to allow the traumatised person to experience roles or moments where they do have power. And that actually reminds me of, fairly early on after I left, I wanted to learn self-defence because I felt, frightened about the world around me. And I thought maybe one thing I can do is learn self-defence. And I was actually, I think, a bit too scared to join an actual, gym, but I found a woman's gym. And I thought that might be a bit safer, but it was actually it was a women's sports fighting gym, so it was female MMA, mixed martial arts, and I went along initially just to learn self-defence, but I soon got involved with the mixed martial arts, and it was phenomenal for my healing. I had never been in a position where I was physically allowed to just let rip, to punch, to kick, to physically throw all my physicality into something. Normally it's don't climb a fence, keep your legs together, just hand around the food, very demure physicality for a woman in the Brethren, whereas we weren't allowed to do sports and things like that. So to be in an environment where I was encouraged to use my physical power was so freeing and so empowering.
And you would have made friends, there would have been a social connection, a feeling of safety in a group of people who...
And it was
so
also a way to
it.
physically let out the anger at the injustices. And it was quite interesting actually, because eventually one of the trainers found out about my background, and he looked at me and he said, I won't forget it, he said, the angry ones always make the best fighters. And I was a good fighter, So, absolutely fascinating. But, so a key aspect of...
imagination, creativity, movement, body, collaboration, joining bigger groups, choirs, dancing groups, something that gives you connection, but also body awareness.
I reckon there's something. And I don't know if he specifically talked about this, but personally, I've felt great power and healing and physically experiencing something that I thought was taken off me. And I can give you some specific examples because it impacted me deeply at the time. So when I left, I had nieces and nephews. My first nephew had been born, but now I've got multiple nieces and nephews. And part of a huge grief for me when I got excommunicated from the Brethren was the knowledge that I was going to lose all my nieces and nephews that I would have in the future and that I had now. And it was an enormous grief to me because I'm a family person. I love people, and it was a huge grief to me. And I thought in my head, in my traumatized brain, I thought, I'm never going to have a relationship with a lovely little child again. I'm never going to be an aunt. It's gone to me. Because, in that space of being freshly out, I had no new friends. I had no new social circles. I was in a very isolated, lonely place. And for me, I thought that was forever. I was never going to have nieces and nephews again. But after a few months, I did establish some relationships with some beautiful little people. And I can remember a moment walking to a park with some kids, and these two dear little kids came up, probably 2 and 4, took me by the hand, and they just held my hand and walked with me, and I just felt warmth flood my body, and it was a somatic healing experience of it overlaid that pain and that lie that I was never going to have this beautiful social experience and trust and love again. It was so powerful. It was a physical feeling.
Yeah, because you were holding their hands, their little hands. They were walking along beside you. In this
there was trust and friendship, and it was like, I can feel this again.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because they say a traumatized person gets involved in numbing their pain,
and then numbing their pleasure,
and numbing their pleasure.
Block the pain, and so then you block the pleasure too. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So they're saying you need to reinstate pleasure.
Yeah.
Bessel said that. You need to create and reinstate pleasure. But of course, what do cults say?
Yeah.
Pleasure's bad. Pleasure's sin. Pleasure is self-serving. Pleasure is selfish.
Fascinating.
But actually, it's motivation for change.
Yeah.
Like he talked about emotions and about how emotions are signals to our body to move.
Yes.
And I keep on telling people who don't listen to their emotions, why switch off the control center of your plane that you're flying? I mean, this is the lights and the beeps that tell you need to do something. So a lot of people have switched off these emotions and don't know what they mean. A lot of people who haven't been in cults,
just
otherwise
have got used to denying them, repressing them.
Yeah, but they serve an important purpose. I mean, when we feel happy and joy, we're telling our body's going to go, I'm going to do that again, thank you very much. If we're feeling anger, our body is sort of moved towards to fix something or run away from something, usually sort of attack something maybe. When we're feeling sadness, it's our body's signal to move away and heal. So there's movement associated with emotion.
You need to recognise emotion. And there was that concept that you can't do trauma therapy, Bessel said, if you don't have words for the internal experiences. And what do groups like cults do? They emotionally shut you down. They don't give you the words to use. Everyone who's left Glorival is just bitter. That's the only word in Glorival that exists for someone who's left.
Yeah.
Come on, can we have a bit of nuance around all the various emotions?
Grieving.
Upset.
That they're figuring out how to cope. They're overwhelmed.
Hurt.
Yeah.
Lonely.
Yeah.
There are dozens of words that can explain why a leaver leaves and speaks against the group. It's not just bitter. But in a group like that, you don't get given as children tools. It's wrong to be anger. It's wrong to be,
And he talked about in recovery how critical it is to learn to access yourself. He said you need to, there was a number of steps, but one of them was learn how to calm yourself down and learn to access yourself and deal with the different parts of yourself. You need to get to know these different parts of yourself. So it's all about looking inside and understanding your internal world.
In a cult, that is so selfish. Because who are you oriented towards in a cult? always the cult leader, the leader.
And
The group's ideology. It's never you and yourself. And so he talked about people who have a lot of trauma will often have a lot of self-hatred. A lot of like sexual abuse victims think that, you know, I deserved it, I didn't fight for myself. Like they own a lot of that shame. And he actually says people won't get better unless they deal with the self-hatred and the self-loathing, and they need self-compassion. And if you're in a cult, the word self is like, it's sin.
Yeah.
So you have to move people to realise that they are loved, valued individual people, and if it's a religious cult, you can use that God.
And you can't do that in isolation, can you? You can't shift those ideas in isolation. And could I just come back to Judith Herman, you know, my guru, who Bessel mentioned 3 or 4 times.
I know.
Just saying.
And I sat next to Kaz and she goes, "That's Judith Herman."
He was even quoting some of her work.
He was. She's amazing.
Anyway, so she keeps on saying this idea of agency and connection. They have been disrupted in trauma. And this is exactly what Bessel said, you know, that we need to find mutuality and reciprocity and support survivors. It doesn't happen, you know, that trauma doesn't happen if you're well connected and you have a safe home. This is all about the connective thing, and also the agency, the control thing is being able to move your body and do the thing that should be done to get you to safety. And that idea of the people running from the Twin Towers and how, you know, they were able to have agency and rescue themselves. You know what I remember as a child at Centrepoint is being unable to do anything and be physically stuck and hiding. You know, there's a sense of, in my memories, there's a sense of hiding and stuck, physically stuck. So actually being able to be a powerful agent, and I think of one of the things that you could do that pulls in that idea of control and agency and movement and action and imagination is writing. You know, to actually sort of be able to craft your own narrative. It also helps with that disintegration, because he talked about traumatic memories are all emotion and they're all bodily sensations, that there's no narrative, which makes trauma survivors terrible court witnesses because they have no narrative, and the court wants a narrative. But what you've got instead is a somatic memory. It's in your body that you have no control about when it comes out, and emotions, strong emotions, like you remember feeling afraid, you remember feeling abandoned, but you don't actually know who the people were necessarily, because it's all disintegrated all over your body. But when you write, you can actually kind of pull the story together in a way that makes you the powerful agent, and it integrates. It's like, I don't remember that bit. What could it have been?
And for people leaving cults where their education was minimised, non-existent for some groups, the writing concept can be quite difficult.
Yeah.
They don't feel confident with a pen and a pad and a paper. They might not be readers either. And so you've got these roadblocks where there's ways that people can heal and recover, but they're going to have to find the one that works for them. And this is a long period. And so the road to recovery. I was also absolutely fascinated by some particular types of therapy that were discussed. And one of them, in particular, EMDR. So you've got
eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and he kept on talking about it. He was very funny. He kept on saying, we can't talk about this new therapy. We can't do research on this because basically we're just
crazy
wiggling our fingers, wiggling and fingers
What's going
in front
on?
of people. You're not going to get any respect from your colleagues for that therapy, are you?
But there is research that shows it changes the circuitry in the brain, and it's not just about the fingers. What's happening is there's eye tracking going on whilst a therapist is doing talk therapy, and it's accessing different parts of the brain and changing the circuitry. And I know for a fact that one of the leavers from Gloryvale that we're going to be doing a seminar with soon to assist counsellors and therapists, he has had incredible success with EMDR. He has been they've been working on memories, and he firstly could not tell the story without the panic attacks and things coming back to him. And then after sessions of this, he can now retell those memories. But he hasn't lost his ability to feel in other parts of his life. He's not numbing himself. There has been a rewiring. So for him,
He did have a caveat. He said that EMDR, he said quite clearly, EMDR is not showing yet to help with child trauma and developmental trauma. He said it's helping with adult traumatic memories.
He said it does not change the imprint of insecure attachment in childhood.
No, but he said that if you have a childhood memory, so if there is a coherent childhood memory, then EMDR can be useful, but it doesn't trump the lack of attachment. So if you've had a really good, nice, secure, attached life, then you have an adult traumatic event.
Help with that.
Huge success there.
Yeah.
If you have a childhood memory that you have, the capacity to have some understanding and good memories on, you can work through that. But if you have also this underlying attachment disorders,
that makes sense to me. Okay, yeah.
That's getting trickier.
Yeah, because I've had EMDR and I don't think it didn't help me necessarily.
Yeah. So just so the average person probably hasn't got a clue what is involved. Yeah. He said that EMDR doesn't rely on having a narrative. This doesn't rely on a relationship with a therapist or drugs. He said you visualise the trauma, you don't need to talk about it, and then you follow the person's finger, which so it does sound mad.
Yeah, and it does feel like hypnosis, like genuinely they sit in front of you and they ask you to go back to a memory. So it's around memory and recall. They do ask you to go back there in your mind, so it's not necessarily that you have to describe it, but you have to go back there in their mind, which is quite full on. And so you have to sit here and go back and forward like that. And even that, I must admit, another thing I found confronting is that the therapist has to move really close to you. And so, one of my a horrible memory is two priests, sitting right up close to me. And so to have a therapist come and sit close to me, even that is a bit like, whoa, you're in my... So just, those are all things to navigate and think through. And then they ask you to access things like almost like a wise part of your brain and think of... a safe thing or whatever, and anyway, definitely give it a try. It might work for you.
Can I say what the science says about this?
Yeah, changing circuitry in the brain.
He said that they did a study. He said he had to compare it with a drug because they needed to get some funding somehow. So he compared EMDR versus fluoxetine, which is Prozac, versus a placebo, and he said in the EMDR arm of the study, the patients, and they did 2 months of this, I think it was, and the patients improved by 59% at the end of the trial, and they kept getting better. So then they stopped, no more EMDR. They kept on getting better over time compared to the fluoxetine arm. So they had fluoxetine or Prozac for 2 months and then stopped. 46% of them got better, and then the placebo arm, who were getting a sugar tablet, 44% of them got better. He said, look, if your patients aren't getting better by 44%, no matter what you do, then you need to look at your practice, because that's the placebo arm. So basically the placebo arm and the fluoxetine arm were not statistically significant. No. So they were effectively the same. But of note, the fluoxetine group, once they stopped the fluoxetine, they got worse over time.
Then they regressed.
Yeah, but they didn't get, I don't think they got worse than when they started.
No, but they
just got worse. And then at 8 months, 60% of the EMDR patients, so they only had 2 months of treatment. This is now 6 months later, they had no further symptoms compared to the fluoxetine, who'd mostly returned to having PTSD.
Wow.
So that was remarkable.
He said EMDR works better than drugs.
Yeah, and doesn't just work better. That's remarkable.
But again, difficult potentially in a cult context because of the childhood attachment issues that generally go on around those kind of groups.
And a lot of these groups are anti-getting outside support, so they're probably not going to be able to have access or finances to getting EMDR, unfortunately.
Often after you leave, they say that cult leavers are one of the groups that don't attend to their mental health needs nearly quickly enough. No. And you would
because
know
of
that's
their
true.
imagination about that.
That's right.
So, it's a hopeful thing to see that there is something that can help certain groups with PTSD. So,
EMDR is one of those. But, there's also these other powerful things like re-establishing a sense of community. He talked about that, finding safe relationships somewhere.
And he talked about support groups, didn't he?
Yeah.
He talked about the power of connecting with people who understand what you've been through. And we've said this before about how there's a public perception I've noted in health that therapy therapy in groups is kind of not that great, and I've subsequently kind of realised that I think that's the association with Alcohol Anonymous.
Right.
Is that drunks and addicts, they're the ones who do
Yeah.
group therapy. So it's pretty hard to convince people to go into groups. And I think particularly if you've been harmed in a group, you're even less likely to want to do that. But this trauma expert said to us yesterday the power of healing in a group. So please...
And that we're social creatures.
Yeah, please consider this as an option.
Yeah.
It was in that context.
Yeah.
Not in isolation.
Very powerful.
Absolutely.
Talk to us about neurofeedback.
I don't quite understand that.
Another really interesting lot of research that's been done on ways to help, I guess, rewire the brain or the circuitry.
I don't know how available it is in New Zealand, though. That's
Not
the problem.
sure, but it was on one of
Basically, you have...
Frontiers of Hope. That's the group that brought Bessel out. I believe there was
Wasn't that cheap?
some neurofeedback. Just think of it like going into a clinic and playing a video game, basically.
But attach multiple electrodes to your head that are measuring your brain chemistry and your brain circuits. And then basically, it portrays it on a video screen in front of you, often in the form of a game. And so there might be like a bunch of different rocket ships that represent different emotions. And you're encouraged to try and get, for example, the green rocket ship, which is representing the calm part of your brain. You're encouraged to get the green rocket to overtake like the angry rocket or the fearful rocket. And because your brain responds to the visual cues, you can start trying to move the green rocket forward, and that then comes down, brings forward that calm part of your brain. So there has been...
He was saying, that
good research.
It was in traumatised children he was doing it. He said the frontal lobe is asleep and the brain's controlled by the limbic system, which is the emotional centre. And this was research they were showing on children. So there was a little bit of hope there for traumatised kids.
They did this brain scan of this child who was utterly...
Refugee child.
No, the other one, a terror.
Oh, yeah.
Just a terror of a child in the home. And then the transformed child a year or two later. And this terror of a child, they did a brain scan and the frontal lobe. Dead.
Now,
It was dead. And then he was just running on fight and anger and angst and all of this stuff. And now, after the brain scan, the frontal lobe, that's where your logic, your thinking.
Executive function, control.
Executive function,
It's
control.
what
Decision making,
and
logical.
and control over the animal brain that just wants to do whatever a jolly well wants to do.
The kid looked utterly transformed.
Yeah.
That was
The
exciting.
tricky thing is, like, I must say, I mean, while that is exciting, I also can't envision a future where every single New Zealander is going to have, good access to going and sitting in a clinic and having 50 electrodes attached to their head for one session a week. Like, I just can't ever, like, we already know that even therapists, there's such low access to therapists, and I just can't imagine there ever being money and access and resource to give everyone neurofeedback. So I guess I'm much more deeply excited by the concept that things like learning how to move your body, learning how to build safe relationships or find safe communities, learning how to...
Because it's something the person can do.
There's something the person can do in their own home, in
More
their own
accessible.
backyard. Yeah, anyone can find some physical movement to do. Anyone can learn how to build some safe relationships, and it's not going to cost you money.
But
So
the
that's
problem
good
for
news.
ex-cultists coming out is they would like a fully formed, fixed solution as soon as possible. So their life, they don't want to live with the years of rebuilding, creating those safe friendships, because that's years that they might not be very productive in the workforce because their brain might be unable to. If you think that for a few hundred or thousand, I don't know how much these treatments are, you can go and within a short number of months, you are functioning in a less traumatised fashion than you have
It would be
been.
wonderful.
It would be cool.
It would be wonderful. And it doesn't cost you as much personally. Like the emotional personal cost of seeing a therapist is pretty big. And
As
like
opposed to sitting playing a video game with neurofeedback.
and like, so it might not be very available in New Zealand, but hey, I don't know how many attendees there were yesterday.
1,000.
1,000. Like this group of professionals, some other, there were doctors and lots of therapists there, and there was probably some people with lived experience there as well, sort of saying this really matters, this really, really matters, and we are working with these people and we're trying to find ways to meet their needs better. So like that gives me hope that there's a growing body of people who are more conscious in the workforce of of the role of trauma in people's inability to function in the world.
And as we look at, sort of to wrap up in the next few minutes, can we just touch on the issue of psychedelic drugs? There's research going on. And I know, Kaz, this might have been a little bit triggering for you. You've come from a cultic group that used psychedelic drugs and people were taken advantage of.
Oh, yeah. So Bessel did talk about this exciting new option of psychedelics being used with mental health support to help people to go to a place in their head and kind of like revisit it with a different emotional response.
And put the memory in the past, not in the present.
Yes, put the memory in the past. And he said it was quite hard to get off the ground. In America, there were lots of refusals, and they had to sue, do some legal action to actually get these trials underway. But, when I think about it, I think psychedelics were deliberately brought into Centrepoint by the leader to put people in a highly suggestible state where they would end up being more controllable. And for some of those Centrepoint people, the adults, I believe, I've spoken to at least one person who's talked very fondly about what they experienced on LSD or ecstasy or whatever it was, and how it really critically changed some of their stuck stuff. But in the same time, in the same potentially day, there were children,
being
12 and
abused
13-year-olds, being kind of raped while under the influence of this. There's the same taking a tablet and having an experience, but one being potentially positive and the other being grossly
misused. Which and Dr. Van Der Kolk talked about that. Like he said, he's on the one hand it's really exciting. He said on the other hand, I'm deeply concerned about this because and he named Big Pharma and things like that. He said it could basically be wide open to being used,
misuse.
And the other fascinating thing that he cautioned around was the context in which the drug is taken. So he said with all the medical trials, it's been done in a safe environment with therapists on the left and the right of the person. Whereas he said, if we're just handing out a drug over the counter and letting someone go off and take it in their own home or in an unsafe environment, it could have a complete opposite effect.
Dangerous.
So caution advised.
I think the conference was incredible. A couple of quick, just a takeaway. There's hope. There's hope for people who have trauma. We can talk about trauma, but let's talk about recovering from trauma. There's hope. There's research. There are experiences. You can put those memories of the past and keep them in the past. They don't need to keep intruding into your present peace and disrupting it and destroying it.
Yeah, and that process of the past coming into the present and ruling your life isn't that you are crazy or mad.
No.
Yeah.
It's a survival technique that worked at a time but now is causing problems. And it makes sense. It makes sense that it happens. And we need to upskill at how to help people who are dealing with that and stop pejoratising them and making them the problem.
Buy the book.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us for today's episode. Don't forget to listen to us on all of our various platforms. Head to YouTube even and leave a comment. We love reading comments from fans. And we thank Plains FM again for supporting us in this endeavour to get Cult Chat off the ground. We are looking forward to coming back with you again soon. Bye, everyone.
Ka kite anō.
See you later. If anything in today's episode was difficult or upsetting for you and you would like to talk to somebody, we encourage our New Zealand listeners to free call or text 1737 for support from a trained counsellor. Or you might like to visit the resources section of the Olive Leaf Network website, where you can find a range of organisations and resources that might be able to support you. We would also like to remind you that the views and thoughts and opinions that have been expressed in this program are the speakers alone, and Cult Chat does not necessarily endorse or share them.